And in the role of, I want to say his name is Lucas, yes, is Joel Edgerton.
All right.
Who just happened to be in town.
One of the boys.
Joel, why are you in Chicago?
Because I am a Chicagoan.
It was a very...
Born and raised. And I sound funny. My brother's directing a movie here right now, and I'm in it because he's my brother in it. My mother wouldn't allow it if he didn't cast me in it.
So Jeff, let's just start from the beginning. What were the initial kernels of ideas that sort of came together into this screenplay?
Sure. Well, when I write these things, I write on two tracks kind of at one time. On the one hand, you've got genre and plot and all the fun stuff, cars flipping over and gas stations blowing up. And the problem with that is I really don't like plot very much. I don't like endings very much. And and if you only concentrate on plot, then I think you're missing the boat. So what I try and do on this other track is try and find some emotion in my life that is palpable, something really, really personal to me, that can make it through the gauntlet of the filmmaking process, from writing to directing the film, to editing the film, to releasing the film. Because I think it's kind of the goal of a filmmaker or a storyteller to somehow transfer an emotion to you all. That's success to me. It's not just making sure you guys understand the story or anything like that. I just want you to feel something. And so at the beginning of this, I was struck by a few genre things, a few plot things. I knew I wanted two guys in a car driving really fast down a southern back road in the middle of the night. I wanted them to have night vision goggles. I even knew I wanted a boy in the back seat with superpowers. All these things kind of came first, but I was well into the plot before I knew what the movie was really about. And not to get too heavy, but at the time I was a new father. My son was about 8 months old, and he had a febrile seizure, which is the body's reaction to a spike in fever. It's actually more common than you might think. But for my wife and I, we were terrified. My son, started to convulse and he turned gray and his eyes rolled back in his head, and we rushed him to the hospital. And being a new father, I don't know, for those of you that are parents, that first year is, you're just kind of underwater, your life is changing and you're just kind of terrified. But this instance really made me realize I could lose him. And that scared the hell out of me. So I started to try and deal with that, and I started to try and figure out what it meant to be a parent. So if I'm terrified of what could happen to my son, what do I try and do? Do I try and control his life? Do I try and control the environment he's in? Do I try and control who he's going to grow up to be? Well, that's not going to work because you don't have any control. That's what the seizure taught me. So what's it mean to be a father? What's it mean to be a parent? I think you just constantly try and define, and as they grow, you redefine who they are. You don't try and project who you want them to be. You just try and figure out who they are. And once I realized that's what parenthood was about, that kind of became the trajectory for Mike Shannon's character. That kind of became the trajectory for the film. And all of a sudden, my cheesy sci-fi chase movie started to have some relationship to an emotion that I felt was palpable enough to actually get transferred to an audience.
One of the jobs of parents is to, over the years, loosen that grip, that protective grip, and fortify your children enough to go out on their own. And that's sort of what happens here. You usually don't see them go out on their own this young, but that's kind of the idea, is that he's just trying to get his son to a place, a literal place, where he can let him go. Is that part of the...
that's life, right? That's they're always going to leave. You just hope they leave in an organic, natural way. You hope they go away to college and you have a good cry in the car and go home, and they're done. Maybe they'll call you every once in a while. That's what you're supposed to do as a parent. But in the worst sense, they leave too soon, and that really sad. And so, so I made a movie about that. But regardless, as parents, we know we're going to have to say bye to our children. That's just how it works. You're going to have to separate yourself from them at some point. And so, yeah, that felt like a thematic point worth making a movie about.
And Joel, your character is really fascinating because I think we might know the least about him other than just that one little piece of dialogue you have about being childhood friends with Michael's character. And but you're the most pragmatic guy of the bunch, and that might be you see a sick kid and you want to take him to the hospital. You're the only one that actually says that. Talk about how did you two find each other, first of all, and then talk about sort of what drives why did he just sort of pick up that relationship again after so many years? Do you think?
I'll start with Jeff and I met each other in Santa Fe. I was working on the kind of very complicated Western movie Jane Got a Gun. Anybody knows about that? I was going to. Oh hey,
Saw it.
that's right. Natalie Portman's in the house. And I was going through a very complicated time. The beautiful thing about it was I'd seen Jeff's other movies. I'd seen Take Shelter. I hadn't seen Shotgun Stories, but I very quickly watched that. Down the road, Mud was playing at the cinema, and I got to read a screenplay and get to meet Jeff all in the same week, and it was fantastic. I felt like in all the darkness I was going through, that was quite a bright moment, and I felt like I was in a very lucky position that Jeff was asking me to be involved in his next movie, and the kind of guys that I liked as filmmakers were right in the wheelhouse that Jeff was sort of masterfully operating in, which is filmmakers who kind of told stories that were that felt very, I hate to use the word, but I'm going to, very organic. The characters felt real. The camera was positioned in a way that didn't feel like it was drawing attention to itself. It just felt like filmmaking that I loved of the 70s kind of milieu. How do I say that word? But anyway, so, you know, like I felt like I'm in a very lucky position, and I've gone on record saying that Jeff's screenplay of this movie, and you can imagine now that you've seen it, it was a real page turner, like in the true sense. Like Jeff was establishing these questions and holding off on the answers, and then he'd give them at the right time, and yet at the time you got the answer, there'd be a new question. And amongst that, he was managing to create these great characters who also weren't over-explained, and therefore I could imagine as an audience you were sitting there going, I'm a part of creating who these people are because I get to fill in the backstory. And that leads me to the second part of that question, which is Lucas to me was such an interesting character because you don't know much about him, and yet he's the character that does have a choice as to whether he's on this, for lack of better words, crusade or not. In biblical terms, if you look at it in that through that prism, he's a disciple who has caught a glimpse of a prophet, of some kind of a child who has power, who has a window to a possibility that there's something greater in life than the practical day-to-day, which I struggle with. And then chooses to go on a mission, and he may have left behind something very significant himself in order to become, as per his old job, to serve and protect a family selflessly. Selfishly in order to confirm what that first spark may confirm for him or not. And I just found it such an interesting place to hold in that story. And you know, I've had a career where I'm like, I'm scared. I'm somewhat scared of being the lead of movies. It's nice to hide behind movie stars, and it's nice to play supporting characters because they're quite often the most interestingly fleshed out characters. So I don't have an ego about what place I hold in a movie.
But what I do have an ego about is I feel good about being next to people who know how to make good movies, because inevitably that makes me a better person on screen.
And Joel is the lead in my next film. He really is.
She's already shot. It's already shot.
If you pay enough money.
Well, you mentioned, I mean, you put it actually better than I did when I was talking to you earlier about, you mentioned it's like watching a novel, like reading a novel, but yeah, it is this parceling out of crucial details. It's masterful the way you kind of just very slowly, but there's almost never a scene without something revealed in it. And talk about this, does that come in the writing and does that come in the editing? How do you sort of find the formula to, or lack of formula to sort of get that right?
Well, this is the leanest screenplay I've ever written, so it was designed that way from the beginning. I heavily outline these things before I start typing into a computer, so I kind of know each scene. I know the transitions between each scenes. I know when information is given, when it's not given. So it was definitely a calculation. It's not a calculation that always works. I'll be the first to admit that. But something happened when I made my first film where I removed this piece of information that I felt like made the film better. My first film is called Shotgun Stories, and Mike Shannon's in it, and he has a shotgun wound in his back. And throughout the film, different characters that aren't family members offer up ideas of how they think he got shot in the back. And I had this great scene, right, 3/4 of the way through the film, where that gets explained. And every time I wrote it, it was false. And it was because his brother was talking to his wife, and both of those characters would have known this story. There was just no reason for those two characters to be having that conversation. And as soon as I removed it, the film got better. The writing got better. And so this was kind of the culmination of that, where I said, well, okay, I'm just going to have dialogue in this film that just strictly reflects the behavior of these scenes. This is how these people would speak in these scenes. They all know what's going on. There's no need for them to stop and fill you all in. That would be a cop-out. That'd be lazy writing. So I'm going to have to try and find ways to get information in that feels organic. And it's really tricky, and sometimes you just don't get to do things. I wrote this amazing scene. Well, I never actually wrote it down. It's in my head of the moment when Sam Shepard's character, back way before the film starts, comes to the home of Mike and Kirsten and tells them that he's going to take their son away from them. It's a great scene. And I kept thinking about ways to work that detail into the film, and it just never felt right, much like that story in Shotgun Stories. So you all didn't get to...
Very cool.
That's actually exactly how I was going to start the next film. So you all didn't get to find out about that this time. But that doesn't mean when you work with amazing actors like this guy and amazing actors like Mike and Kirsten, that when they meet the first time, you don't feel some strange subtext there. You don't feel some awkward behavior between the two of them, because I obviously told them about the scene. So, it's just kind of this deal that you make with yourself as a storyteller. You're gonna get some things and leave some other things behind, but hopefully the subtext remains.
One of you bring up the Sam Shepard character that I was most fascinated by the both subtle and I think very strong comments you have about I don't know if it's about all religion, but it's certainly about these more fringe religions like it's shown here, that these people literally, I mean, they clearly had this ranch for many years before this boy came, and they completely restructured their religion around him, which speaks volumes to the fluidity of certain religions. That I was thinking about these doomsday cults that have, they pick a day and then it doesn't happen, so they pick another day. Like that's sort of what this reminded me of. That they just completely, they're saying things they don't even understand it they've switched the times of day that they have their services. Were you trying to say something about organized religion or yes, that's a dangerous
go
topic,
there.
but yeah.
Let me offend everyone at once. Look, if you're going to be a writer and you're going to build a full character, you're going to have to build a belief system for those characters. So I believe there's a belief system for each of these guys. I think Joel's character, for example, I kind of always painted him as a bit of an agnostic. You know, he's this guy who's a state trooper that probably was out on a road somewhere at some point in Texas and came upon a wreck, and there were probably dead kids in that car, and he realized, look, this just happens. This is how the world is. There's no justice in it. There's no order to this. This just happens. And so when he sees a sick kid on the side of the road, and the father's saying, no, he's not going to die. He's meant for this other thing. He's like, that's bullshit. This kid can die because I've seen it happen. And that's a belief system. And that's a belief system I feel like I built into that character. Similarly, the ranch in and of itself represents, an organized system of belief. And I think, I grew up Methodist. I went to church on the weekends. I think organized religion can be a positive thing. But here's when it starts to be a negative thing. When you start to take your system of belief and start to put it on other people and start to tell them, look, I think I've got this figured out and I'm going to tell you how it is. That actually becomes quite evil. And so the ranch, they have a belief system that is selfish. They have a belief system that it has nothing to do with what this boy needs, which is what his parents are trying to figure out. It's just what they need. They want to, drink the Kool-Aid and get on the spaceship. And that's not just. That's not morally right. And you have a character in Dope, who's the character in the truck that says, I'm an electrician. And sometimes we're asked to do things that are beyond us. I think he has a moral compass that is quite clear to him, but his religious doctrine tells him to do something else, such as put some duct tape in his pocket and go tie a woman up and torture her until she tells you where her daughter is. This is, this is not what we're here to do. And so, on the one hand, it's a bit of a swipe at the power and the potential danger of organized religion, but it's also just being a good writer. I'm just trying to give these characters belief systems that they can operate on.
I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to throw it to you guys. Talk about finding your Alton. What were you looking for? What did you like about Jaden? I don't know. You guys have seen St. Vincent before? That was the little point in it. Okay, so what did you like about him, and what were you looking for?
Well, I wasn't looking for a child actor. Usually child actors just send me running for the hills because they're just these weird little robots. They've had whatever beauty is in a child, they've had it beaten out of them. And they just start to tap dance and perform for the adults around them. And they're really intelligent, really talented kids, so they can pull it off. I didn't want that. And actually, I heard about Jaden a few times, and I was like, nah, I'm not going to. He's been in other movies. He's already ruined. But then I met him, he flew to Austin to meet me. Within 5 or 10 minutes, I realized he was a different kind of boy. He had this massive amount of intelligence, but he was very honest in the situation that we were in. He wasn't performing for me. He was just telling me kind of what he thought about things. He was very, very aware of the situation he was in. And that's when it clicked. I said, well, I have to have this boy that at some point becomes aware. A switch is flipped and he understands his place in the universe. That's going to be really difficult to buy. And this boy really has an awareness like that. So if he can handle the back half of the film, which I think is the trickiest, I'll handle the front half. I'll just mute him. I'll stick his nose in a comic book and not have him talk very much. And then at some point he wakes up. And Jaden had that. You could just see it in him. And it worked out.
Joel, what did you sort of glean from just working with him? What did you see in him that you hadn't seen in other child actors?
I personally worry for children who are in movies, and I know that because I by the way, I didn't realize through the press tour we just did in New York that a lot of journalists posed question to Kirsten because she had been a child actor. But some of them make it through and some of them don't. And I think for the fact that a lot of them don't, I worry about just in general about taking a child and putting them in a movie. And I wrote an email to one child, well, his mother's email address said, please read this to your son. Don't presume that, you're amazing and you're wonderful in this movie and creatively you've done a wonderful thing. but don't presume when you go to school and people treat you differently that you're any different to the other children, and that and don't allow yourself to feel like you're more special than them, albeit that you are special in your own way, as are all of your classmates. You know, I don't feel like I ever needed to say that to Jaden. I feel like attention is hard enough when you're a grown-up person. It can really pollute and dilute and deviate the personalities of grown-up adults when they get attention, because we're all inbuilt to want to be loved, and when we're shown too much love that's misguided and just freely given, it can inflate us and it can cause trouble in our personal lives. And so with a child, I think that can only be exacerbated. I feel good about Jaden. He feels like a grown-up in a child's body. In fact, he may actually be 45 and just tricking us. He might have accidentally, his mother might have cut his bonsai nerve. But he's smart. I did go toe-to-toe with him on a couple of his school tests because he did school while we're on set. And I don't mind freely admitting that he beat me in pretty much everything. But he's a very smart, intuitive, engaging, thoughtful young boy who also knows how to be a child, and his mother is not someone who's pushed him into it, but is writing sidecar to something that he's interested in doing. So I feel okay about him. And I think it's a responsibility of a director in the future to keep checking in with a child that they've worked with, just to, you know, help steer them in the right direction.
All right, who has questions for our guests? And I can barely see the back rows. It's very bright. Okay, yes, right here.
You can ask Mike a question as well. I'll answer it for him.
I thought the movie was really good. It had me on the edge of my seat. I was, clutching my friend's arm and everything. The movie actually brought me in remembrance of an older movie that I saw. Have you ever seen Firestarter? Yeah, so it kind of, not to say it's the same thing, but it just brought me in remembrance of that.
No, he totally ripped it off. He was talking about Stephen King.
Right, I thought it was a good movie. So my question is, what do you think about the way cinema is headed? Because I think that there are so many movies that come out, and a few of them are good, but a lot of them are not great. You know, a lot of movie directors want to have these big budget box office movies just for the glitz and glamour, and you don't really get to the plots. So my question to you is, where do you think cinema is headed, and do you think that, it should go back old school where, it was just like you got into the movie, or does it have to be a lot of glitz and glamour and all that?
I'll repeat your question. She started by saying she really liked the movie. She was asking, where do I think movies are going? Because she thinks some movies really suck. So, look, I don't know. I think there is a desire to get together with a group of people in a room and have a shared experience. I don't think that's going anywhere. I hope that theaters keep putting money into the theaters and keep the screens nice, keep the projectors nice, because I think that's the only thing that's going to get us out of our dens. But I do think it's the job of the studios to create stuff that inspires us. I'm not going to say you've never seen it before, but maybe it holds the thing up to the light in a way that somebody hasn't thought of it that way before. I think that is possible. And things happen in cycles. This is nothing new. Movies sucked before, they're going to suck again, and they're going to be, every once in a while, there's going to be a movie that you sit up just for you sit up and say, wow, that struck me to my core. And that wasn't just a silly movie. That was something that makes me think differently about things. Maybe I'm going to call my mom, or I don't know, hug my son. And that's really good. And that's why we keep going to movies. It's because that's possible. It rarely happens, but it's possible. And so all I can do is start, is keep trying to do that for myself. I can't do it for all of you, but I can do it for myself. And I think if I'm as specific as possible to the way I'm feeling and the way things are happening in my life, then I've got a shot at it.
In the first row behind the railing.
I think this is true of all your films, and it's true of this one. The sound design is just incredible.
Thanks.
And the scene with the car ramming the barricade, it's so visceral, and just throughout, it's just measuring the levels of tension all the way through. It's beautiful. I'm wondering how close is your collaboration with the sound designers?
Yeah, he's asking about the sound design in my films, and he gave me a lot of compliments. So my sound designer is a guy named Will Files. Now, Will Files is a name that you don't know, but you should know. Will Files is a guy that was a couple of years behind me in film school. And when you're in film school, everybody wants to be a director, because that's who gets all the girls. It's not true. And Will always wanted to be a sound designer. It was weird. We all thought he was weird. And as soon as he got out of film school, he went straight to Skywalker Sound, and he started interning. And within years, he was sound mixing, sound designing, and he is now considered one of the best sound designers in the industry. He, in fact, did sound design for the new Star Wars film. He is a badass. He's a nerd, but he's badass. And I was very lucky. We were able to start working together on Take Shelter, and he's been with me ever since. Movies are fake. Everything about movies are fake.
What?
Yeah, it's shocking.
Blowing the lid off, Holly.
And the thing is, though, there are all these different times during the process of making a movie that artifice can reveal itself through bad acting, through poor lighting, through bad wardrobe, lots of stuff, bad writing, bad directing, bad editing. And it can happen in sound design as well. That sound design has to be as appropriate and natural as possible. It can be heightened, but it needs to be heightened in the right way. And what Will Files is great at is kind of understanding that balance. You don't go in and hear anything that doesn't sound correct. He makes it sound great, but it all fits inside the world. And I hope to never work with another sound designer.
Can I just say that every now and then I work with a filmmaker who carries the same people along from project to project, and Jeff is one of those people, and it's a sign of their interest in that person's creative process. Obviously, they like actors, they like to be associated with directors who know what they're doing, but it's also a sign of I'm going to kill myself for saying this, that Jeff is a good person. Paying you a compliment. But the last person that I worked with that had as much kind of repeat business as Jeff was Ridley Scott. And people just, the practitioners, like if they get a phone call, they'll just keep coming back. Adam Stone, who shot the movie, has shot every one of Jeff's movies. Chad, who designed the movie, has pretty much designed almost every one. I think there was a problem with one of them, but it wasn't because of lack of interest. So it's just they keep coming back again and again because, the top of the tree is great. The baubles on the tree want to come back. I made terrible analogies. So.
Right there.
Yeah. Okay. I really enjoy the movies that I've seen of yours, and as an aspiring screenwriter, I'm studying at Paul right now. This is a very general question. Like, I admire that you screenwrite and you direct, and I just want to know what's like some advice you would give like a starting out filmmaker or a screenwriter.
She said she admires your films.
By the way, Joel is also.
We're going to the bar later. If anybody wants to buy me a
She was
drink.
actually asking me the question.
Joel is also a writer director.
Joel's an amazing writer. Have you seen The Gift? He's not this good looking. Look, the advice that I give writers, if we're just going to talk writers for a second, just keep writing. Write as much as you can. There's this great contemporary Southern writer named Larry Brown, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And when I was in college, I discovered Larry's short stories, and it just blew my mind. And I was fortunate enough to work on a documentary about him. And he was talking about the writing process. And he said, I taught myself how to write. He actually started writing in his 40s. He had been in construction, he had been bagging groceries, and then he became a fireman. And that gave him enough time to start to write. And he approached writing the same way as he approached all these other kind of journeyman jobs. And he just did it like a job. And he wrote and he wrote and he wrote until he was good. And I'm a big believer in that. Like, I am definitively not a genius. Like, you just do the work and you just keep doing the work. And if it sucks, burn it and do more. And the same goes for filmmaking to a degree. If you want to be a director, start directing stuff. I really wish we lived in a time, I think it would have suited my personality more if we lived in a time when I could have gone out to Hollywood and, gotten a job underneath John Ford and watched him and studied him, and then one day, be given the job of directing after I'd learned all of these things from watching this great master work. That's not how it goes these days. You just have to make a movie. You have to make a movie and say that you're a director. I think it took until probably after Take Shelter that I would be at dinner parties and say I make movies and not giggle. You just have to kind of accept it, that that's what you are. You look your friends in the eye and you tell them that, and you do whatever you need to do in order to make a film. And again, if it sucks, try again. They're just really expensive. That's the problem.
Hold on, just want to make sure. I see a hand way in the back there.
You asked how I go about finding my funding.
And I think he paid you a compliment
I
as
think,
well.
I think he said, you do such a great job finding funding.
You really appeal to finance.
Oh, God. It's getting late. Every movie's different. With this film, I went directly to Warner Brothers. After Mud, which, was a success, I would say. I think it was like the highest grossing independent film of the year until another higher grossing independent film came out that year. But it did pretty well for what it was. But it took a long road to get there. We premiered that film in Cannes, and it went for probably about 4 or 5 months without anyone buying it. And in fact, no one ever did buy it. When the company that released it finally released it, they said, okay, we'll put in $1.5 million into marketing and distribution, but your financier has to match that. So really, we paid to release that movie. And luckily it worked out. But I was very much struck by the idea that on my next one, I want to try and have the person that pays to make the movie be the same person that pays to make the poster. There's some cohesion there. So I was very specific with this film about going to Warner Brothers. Now, at that point, I had Mud coming out, and it was critically well received. It was making a little bit of money, and fortunately, they thought I was worth taking a risk on. Very calculated risk. This wasn't an expensive movie to make in the studio world. It's the biggest budget I ever had as a filmmaker, but it wasn't, it didn't terrify their bottom line, I don't think. So they gave me enough control to make it the way I wanted to make it. In other cases, if you're really asking the question as a person that wants to make movies, my first film, I put my family's money into it. My grandmother had passed away and left my mom about $18,000, which she gave to me to make the film. My dad owns a furniture store in Little Rock. We're not exactly wealthy people, but he was able to give me about $8,000 that I put into the film. I went to my other grandmother who hadn't died yet and said, when you do die, if you're planning on leaving me the money, give it to me now. She took that okay. But we put together about $48,000 and I made Shotgun Stories. We shot on film and it worked out. It actually didn't work out. My family lost all that money. But it was cheaper than grad school. And so, it's a big conversation. But typically what happens with independent films is you get an awesome actor like this, and Joel Edgerton is worth X amount of dollars in France, X amount of dollars in Germany. And you have a company that pre-sells those territories for you. which means that a company is willing to come in and put up money against those pre-sales, knowing we're going to get this back in these countries. At least we'll get close to it, hopefully. And then you're able to make your movie based on those figures. But there are a lot of ways to skin a cat.
We got time for one more knock it out of the park kind of question. Right here, bro. All right. Don't disappoint.
All right, I'll try my best. First, Mr. Edgerton, black mass and the gift. You rock, dude. I didn't even know you were Australian, man. Mr. Nichols, I got questions about the movie. So here we go. Where does Lucas come from? Like, he's just like
Texas.
There. Like, they just hijack him, you know, like when they say you're coming with me, is he like a friend? Like, where's the glue with that? And the second question is, the dad's eyes, does that little twinkle in the end? So does that mean he's one of them, or there's a part two? And thanks, great movie. It's gonna be a cult classic, bro.
All right. Thanks for the question. Well, Lucas, there's actually, he explains it in the film. Maybe you were getting some popcorn or something. But he grew up with Mike Shannon's character.
Okay.
And at one point, Mike Shannon just knocked on the door and showed up one night and with his son. And his son sat down, took the goggles off, and what the ranch calls communing, he just showed him the light. And that moment kind of turned his life around. And from that point on, he was in. So that happened. As far as the end of the movie goes, I'm curious, did everybody see something in his eyes?
Yeah.
At the end of the movie?
Yeah.